Good afternoon. Welcome back to Zen with a Smile. And as I talked about last week, how my practice has been getting simpler and simpler to the point where it can be encapsulated by just a couple words. And I'm working on thinning those down. There's a deep breath there because having dealt with simplicity quite extensively, it doesn't seem that the topic has been exhausted. In fact, I suspect that there will be an ever-expanding understanding of this, the concept of simplicity. And this is something that's led me to talk about today, about seeing what is. And that sounds simplistic to itself. I guess in keeping with the recent explorations, self-reflection, time alone, time with just my meditation music and my comfortable seat on my front porch, looking out at my little artificial in the sense that in a concrete corner, I create a little oasis of plants. And my plants are, for the first time in a long time, being out of a high-rise, I'm able to surround myself in plants. I'm still in a townhouse kind of situation, so it's not the same as having a garden and a yard, but I'm doing the best with what I have, and it's infinitely better than my previous situation. So sitting on my front porch, looking at my little carefully crafted garden, lots of times to reflect on seeing what is. And seeing what is in contrast, or instead of seeing what isn't. And as I watch people around me, remarkably, or maybe not so remarkably, understandably, people seem to be aware, seem to concentrate, seem to accept what isn't, and what isn't real, while blithely, innocently perhaps, ignoring that which is. That which is just sent a cascading sense of wellness through my body. Just a simple what is. And since the majority of us seem to accept the what isn't as what there is, all that there is, and what isn't is everything that your mind has created, crafted, constructed, construed, constrained, conflicted. All these elements are involved in this elaborate labyrinth of misunderstanding that we maybe not actively create, but are nonetheless ultimately responsible for accepting the illusory, accepting Maya, illusion, as reality. And as we've talked about this from birth, from our first breath, from our first awareness of those outside ourselves, generally speaking, our parents. And the whole world seems to conspire in this elaborate ruse. We're encouraged to develop a sense of self. And for most of us, we never become aware of the role of the ego, of this carefully crafted construct of what we think we are. And the key word there, of course, is think. Anytime we use the brain for conceiving, use the brain for making a plan, anytime essentially that we listen to the brain and give it some validity, give it some, reverence, if you will, respect, when it's simply in this role, the mind is controlled by the ego. And the ego is invested in this false construct, because that's all, after all, that's all that ego is. Carefully or not so carefully, consciously, subconsciously, unconsciously, adaptation, a mechanism, a simple mechanism to responding to the world by fostering this falsity, this sense of self. Now, many have said that we need to silence the mind, that through this silence comes clarity. And through my personal 30-year active struggle with this concept of silencing the mind, I've been happy with quieting it for any amount of time, but never have silenced it. And this struggle had led me through a process of discovery. This discovery is probably not earth-shattering, but it was ego-shattering for me nonetheless. And that was that the mind is not the be-all and the end-all of who and what we are. always a thinker, always the incessant questionings, incessant chatter, monkey mind. I've come to call it. And all my attempts at that elusive, most times elusive gift of clarity, because that's what I've found it to be, a gift to be enjoyed, much the same as bliss, a momentary gift, a momentary awareness, a momentary vibration. So the quandary was what to do. What to do with this mind. And the process that led me to really begin to be at peace with the idea that I was never going to silence it. In an attempt to tame it, I came through a process of questioning, which was my path. The fundamental question, the primary question that always came up is, why were we gifted with this wonderful instrument, this mind, capable of, capable of almost anything. Except the purpose that most apply it to find, to guide, to listen to on how to live their life, what to do, what not to do, why to do it, why not to do it. We use it, ironically, I guess, in this aspect for some kind of guidance, some kind of answer to our questions, some kind of map of behavior, a map of expectations, a map of probabilities. And all of these applications of the mind essentially fall flat in the path of inquiry, the inward directed path of discovering who, what, why, when, how of the universe. So here we are, this quandary, gifted with a mind. Only to struggle to silence it. Is this for me, it was an exercise in futility. And I became almost resentful of a practice that was following that increasingly seemed to me to require this silence. But perhaps there was another way. Perhaps I became able to tame my mind, And this process was rooted in not taking myself or my thoughts or my feelings seriously. Don't laugh at myself was the key. And there was never a shortage of laughability. So, if this mind was not the application of the mind, this tool, this gift, didn't seem to have, there never seemed to be a correlation between what I thought, what I planned, what I struggled with. Didn't seem to make an iota of difference in the outcome of the events that I had so carefully scrutinized. And, of course, focusing on my role in the course of events. And this sounds like an awful lot like the ego to me too. Where do I fit in? Where is the I? Where is the I, me, my? Yeah. Well, you could choose that particular question. Who is I, me, my? Could be the gist of an entire process of awareness. Who is I, me, my? So, talking about taming. Now, the monkey mind, that incessant chatter, taming really entailed ignoring it. It was there. I didn't have to acknowledge its existence because it was consistent. But I learned to manage the noise. I managed to manage the noise. I don't think I ever was able to very successfully lower the volume. Lowering the volume in the sense of silence, the ultimate, lowering the volume until it was silent, seemed to be the most obvious path to put my efforts in. So, turn the volume down and down and down until that blessed silence was there. But I began to understand that silence was not simply the absence of sound. And this was a turning point. This, coupled with efforts to find a use for this fine tool, rather than discarding it, because after all, we're really, when you think about it, given so few tools in our tool bag of coping. Our tool bag of the ultimate searching. What do we have? If we open this tool bag and look for appropriate or useful tools, well, there's the mind. Is it simply to be ignored, discarded, silenced, or perhaps a search for a more appropriate use for this tool? For every job there's a tool. That's a given. But how about for every tool, there's a job? I always like to turn things on their head by examining opposites, because I was beginning at all this time to understand that within duality, within apparent duality, lie non-duality. So simultaneous, kind of a convergence of processes, examining. So I had a study that was supposed to guide me. And as I learned more and more about my studies, most of what was available to me on my path, on the study, the people that were voicing, hadn't really, truly awakened personally. They may have devoted years, and they may have successfully silenced the mind. Who's to say? I would certainly not say it's beyond the realm of possibility. I just found that it was. And now in hindsight, I don't regret or resent any of this 30 years study that I put through discipline, through effort, put tremendous parts of myself, tremendous energy towards following the teaching. And it's the process, after all, of giving up, isn't it? Even Buddha said as soon as he gave up, relatively shortly afterwards, after trying everything, he awoke. It was the process of giving up. So you have to put an effort. I guess it's accumulation of effort to get to the point where you just throw your hands up and say, this is not working, I don't really understand. But in this process, this search for the proper job for the tool, one of the primary tools in my toolbox, in my tool bag, was my mind. So what's the appropriate, what job is this mind designed to do? And that's when I began to consciously work with my mind in the process of sorting, filing, and storing information, and then sorting through these files, sorting through this storehouse, this hard drive, if you will, of accumulated searching, filing, examining this accumulation. And this process accomplished by the mind would allow the greater tool, which was kind of hiding, the self, the God within, the infinite within, to begin gleaming through all this accumulated information, gleaming knowledge, mining it, refining it, panning for gold of the nuggets of wisdom that hid within knowledge, which hid within information. So this process I experienced it never linearly. Everything is, the idea of a ladder of steps up is kind of two-dimensional. And the third dimensional, the spiral. The spiral, spiraling up. The spiral of gleaming, of filing, sorting, and storing information. And information is experiences, thoughts, insights, epiphanies, lessons, karma, emotions. This information was made up of all of those, of the questioning, and then it took a more centered approach to really sift. And by sifting stored information brought to you by all five senses, and you increasingly start to understand that the sixth sense is just as equal participant in your being as you are your five senses. So, information spirals into knowledge, which spirals into wisdom. Now, this is how I discovered my mind's usefulness. And once I abandoned the search for what is, once I relegated my mind to a much lesser role in this, in fact, a role of non-existence. My mind had absolutely nothing to do with my evolution. But it was a tool. And I learned early to put it to work, because the mind is most happy, most content when it's busy doing something. So I put it on some conundrums, problems, relationships, situations, karmas, plural. Put it to work, sorting, filing, and storing. And then I spent some time learning how to access the storage, because everything that is, was, and will be, it's already stored. It's just a matter, like everything, of accessing it. So as I became more clear about what is, and this was made possible by the dismissal of what isn't. Duality isn't. Separation isn't. Division isn't. Mind chatter, monkey mind isn't. In fact, nearly everything becomes dismissed as part of the great isn't. And the irony is that as what is seemingly becomes less, the process of elimination, all that isn't leaves what is. But the beauty of what is, the truth of what is is that it's expansive, all-including, all-enveloping, so that it becomes what is, what isn't. No matter how many elements it's constructed, pales to the point of insignificance, meaninglessness in the face of the reality of what is, the great what is. So, who knows? I'm willing to look now at all my teachers, the 30 years of Zen tradition, Renzai Zen in particular, the world that I dwelt in. Now I can smile, because where I cursed as wasted time, trying to silence my mind, instead I could only wonder if the whole thing was designed to get you to the point I eventually got to. And as I've stated, it's only by throwing up my hands, giving up, that this process could even begin. That there was a flicker of hope that this process could begin. So, what I say now is, maybe these teachings, maybe the beings who left these teachings weren't so unaware after all. Maybe it's part of a process. I certainly can only speak to mine, how it served my process, how it led me to my current state, which is mindful forgetfulness, a state of simplicity where I deal with what comes. I don't spend much effort on what goes, but what comes into my world is all that's relevant. It's all only thing that has any meaning is what happens now. So there's no searching, there's no questioning, there's no activity necessary. There's no effort to be expended. You don't need to try harder. You just be.